If you're really set on LA or New York and you need the loan repayment, I would suggest directing your search to a federally qualified health center. And FQHCs have access to federal student loan repayment programs that can be up to $50,000 a year in forgiveness.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Docs Outside the Box. On today's episode, we have Kay Moreau. Is it Moreau or Moreau?
Moreau, yep.
All right. We have Kay Moreau. She is Senior Recruiter with Provider Solutions and Development. They are the sponsor that we have been rocking with for the past 2 years. And today we're going to talk about looking for a job, but specifically looking for a job in a very competitive market, which I have no idea about that whatsoever, because when I do locums or when I look for a job, I'm in the middle of Central PA. It's not very competitive at all. I'm talking about looking for a job in New York, San Francisco, or maybe even in a specialty that's really competitive in a certain area. How do you stand out, and how do you not negotiate your way out of a really great possibility or possible job? So, Kay, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. How you doing?
Fabulous. Happy to be here. Dr. Nee, it's interesting because, I'm almost 25 years into my career, having worked adjacent to a professional medical staff in a variety of different roles, whether it be recruitment, medical education, the medical staff services, and clinical operations and running practices. So I've spent a lifetime being good friends and talking to providers and physicians about their job search, their ranking list of what matters to them in a position. I've had the luxury of recruiting in exceptionally rural northern locations, and I've also had the luxury of recruiting for world-class organizations and highly competitive geographic locations, LA and Orange County, California, and things like that over the years. And there are a lot of different variables that really need to go into forming your ideas about where you want to do your search, how you want to conduct it, and what you're looking for in that search. First and foremost, I think that hold on.
So when someone is looking for a job, right? Specifically, they are looking. Let's say they're looking in a city, and they want to determine how competitive that area is. I think that's probably one of the last things that people think about. They just say, "Hey, I want to be in this area because I'm attracted to this area." It looks like you're about to break it down for us, but what are the things that someone needs to look at to determine, where they fit in that range?
Right. If you have a very specific area you want to be in, so you're looking at the Philadelphia market, and that's exactly where you need to be because of family, or that's where you want to live, or your spouse's job, or whatever. My number one tip to all recruits is start talking to in-house physician recruiters. There are two types of recruiters out there. There are agency recruiters, and there are in-house. And in-house are employed by the health system and by the hospital. They're typically salaried provider or employees who have, just your best interest in stake. They're not motivated by commissions of placing you in just a specific job that they're going to get paid a commission on. And they often are a lot broader and easier to talk to about your full range of your best interest. And so by talking to, recruiters in hospital settings, they can tell you a lot about what the market really entails, and what is reasonable to ask for and what's not. And we're very often very, very good confidants to share questions with or ask different kinds of variables. Is it reasonable to ask for a 3-day work week? Is this salary a competitive kind of salary for this market? Is loan repayment assistance something that is typically offered in this market? And so that's a great resource to start with. If you really know where you want to be, even if you don't know where you want to be, looking at the job boards and doing some of the legwork yourself, and reaching out to different markets and different in-house recruiters will really help inform your job search, but will also make you a more competitive candidate, and make your package better in the end. The reality is,
I think a lot of people think that when they go into a market that the number one thing they think about is, well, I know that if I go to New York or if I go to Miami, like the salary is going to be lower in general. And I think that they think that there's always like there's going to be the ceiling that is entailed for salary. what are some things that you encourage people to kind of focus on more so in competitive markets than in other markets? I know you mentioned loan repay back, loan forgiveness, and so forth. It doesn't make more sense to focus on that maybe, or focus on like the really smaller details as opposed to like the big ticket items like a salary or days off like that?
Well, I think it depends. I think we almost need to take one step back because different candidates, they have a different set of priorities. And particularly if you're a new grad coming out of school and you've got substantial student loans and you're really motivated to get those paid off quickly, that may be a bigger driver in your job search than would be salary or location or other things. And so if you are in those circumstances where you really have tons of student loans, looking at more northern, more rural locations, typically you'll find that the more challenging of an area it is to place physicians into, the more creative they're going to be with their contracting, or the inverse of the more desirable a location is, LA, New York, Florida, the less competitive they have to be in their offers because they do have tons of applicants. So if you're really, really motivated for those kinds of loan repayment options and assistance, I think you'll find more creative options, in a little bit less desirable market. If you're really, really set on, LA or New York and you need the loan repayment, I would suggest directing your search to a federally qualified health center. Those are organizations that are scattered all over the country, typically serving underserved populations. I talk to physicians who work in federally qualified health centers all the time. There is completely different tempo to practice in those kinds of organizations because these are patients who don't necessarily have access to health care or easy access to health care. They tend to be sicker, but they also tend to be so absolutely appreciative and grateful for the care that is provided to them. And FQHCs have access to federal student loan repayment programs that can be up to $50,000 a year in forgiveness for your loans. And if you had to earn that much income after taxes to pay $50,000 a year, that would be roughly $100,000 worth of salary you'd have to earn. So an FQHC is the kind of organization that can really help you pay down loans if that's a huge hot button item for you. And,
hey guys,
in the greater Los Angeles...
If you guys are wondering what an FQHC is, I'm going to put that link in the show notes. But I found a really good website that shows that a FQHC is providing basically care for people who don't have insurance. There is like federal funding that this center will receive. But a lot of times there's things like comprehensive services that they provide, such as dental services, preventative health, mental health, substance abuse, transportation services are sometimes needed to get these folks there. There's hospital as well as specialty care there. And just so you know, because we were talking about Los Angeles, so I just typed in FQHC and Los Angeles, and there are tons of places.
I believe there's a consortium of well over 50 different federally qualified health centers, most of which have multiple locations scattered across just Los Angeles County.
There's one at Crenshaw Community Health Center. There's so many. There's Central City. So there's a lot. So I agree with you. I think because, for example, like me, I've been in the Midwest or I've been in Pennsylvania. So when I see a FQHC, there's like one, and then there's one that's not for like 50 miles or 100 miles. But, in major cities, there's FQHCs just popping up in all these different urban centers.
Yeah. New York City has New York City Health and Hospitals, which is the largest federally qualified health center in the country.
That's an FQHC?
That's an FQHC.
What?
Yep.
Okay, keep going, please. Keep going.
And that serves entirely an underserved population. I have never recruited for them, but my company has worked with New York City Health and Hospitals for years. I believe that they are working with well over 1 million uninsured residents of the greater New York City 5 boroughs. They have hospitals, they have, health centers, they have community clinics. They had COVID clinics. It's an incredible organization with incredible mission, and it's got access to these types of programs. You'll find compensation sometimes at an FQHC isn't quite as high as you might find with a private employer, but sometimes it can be as competitive, if not more. So they're really worth taking a look at. They're very different types of organizations than a traditional hospital employed position, certainly. But
definitely mission based, really
very
mission based.
Yes. Yeah. So that, those kinds of variables of what you need to think about as you're structuring your job search. I mean, if you're just really, really looking for a specific geography, again, that desirability of the location is just fundamental. If you're looking for a primary care position in Los Angeles County, it's harder to find a location that will give you a 3 or 4 day work week than it is if you go someplace a bit more rural. They have such a plethora of applicants in, say, greater LA or in Florida or even Manhattan that they don't need to compromise and be quite as flexible with applicants in many instances.
What makes an area competitive outside of just, I know that this is a popular place to be? What makes an area competitive?
It's the amenities. I mean, weather is a huge factor, and just the lifestyle. And so there are places that are just, highly desirable because they're great urban centers. People, are flocking to them. Manhattan, years and years ago, I was working in a rural northern New England hospital, and we were building a hospitalist program. And we were recruiting from residency programs all over New England, New York, and North. And it was interesting when I was comparing what our offerings were in terms of work expectations, vacation packages, loan repayment, salary, and all of those variables compared to positions that were being offered in Manhattan. We were paying almost 25% more. And that was the first time I'd really ever encountered such a disparity. And it was because, Manhattan was such a desirable place to be. But the reality is the salary that was being paid back then, 20 years ago, you couldn't have lived in Manhattan on what they were paying physicians to be hospitalists there at that time.
This is New York or Cali?
That was New York, right in Manhattan. Okay. And, if you go out of Manhattan and you go out to, the Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens or even Staten Island, you'll find salaries a little bit higher, even the cost of living is a little bit lower. So you would think that cost of living and salary would go up together, but they don't always go up together.
Have you seen the prices in Brooklyn nowadays and the prices in Queens? Oh, my goodness. It's crazy. You're talking about $4,000 a month now there.
Yeah, well, and the prices in Manhattan may have gone down. So many of us are being able to work remotely now. We don't have to be in urban centers to go to an office. And so, I've heard certainly that there's tons of real estate that's been freed up in places like New York City, and probably, rents have dropped and all of that. But this is kind of the amalgamation of what it is I think I know from about 25 years of doing this.
So we're talking in general, what's on the table is obviously salaries on the table, loan repayback possibly may be on the table. You also recruit specifically for urgent cares also. And urgent cares are popping up all over the place, right? What's it like when you are recruiting for an urgent care? Like if someone is interested in working there, what kind of things should they be expected to, like when they're having a conversation with you and they're saying, I'm interested in working in an urgent care. How's that conversation to go? Like 30,000 top view. What are the things that you talk about? We look at background. I mean, hard to go into an urgent care setting if you're an internist because they see all age groups. A background in primary care or emergency medicine is ideal. Urgent care is a completely different. Internist. So if you're an internist, you cannot see. You have to be able to see pediatrics.
Right. And if you're in a big enough urgent care setting, it could be that you have other coworkers that can do the pediatrics piece. It's not to say that an internist can't get hired in, but it needs to be probably a bigger, urgent care practice to be able to do that work. Urgent care is kind of its own different, unique specialty. Emergency medicine and urgent care, they're shift-based kind of work. There's a lot more flexibility with those kinds of specialties where you could work 1 or 2 shifts a week, 12-hour shifts and do a regular part-time kind of gig. So if you're really looking for that work-life balance and, maximizing your income is not your driver, ambulatory care is a great place to look for work. to be able to do that because they have more flexibility. They're just filling their shifts throughout the week. When you start talking about orthopedic surgery and, cardiothoracic surgery and primary care, those roles, they need people there Monday through Friday or 4 days a week. And so there isn't that necessarily always that same flexibility in that work-life balance and the scheduling pieces. You can certainly ask for what's possible with all of that. But again, in a really competitive market, they don't necessarily they don't have to be as motivated to do a 4-day work week. And so they may not offer that. You can ask for it, but don't be surprised if they say no. And if that's really absolutely a deal breaker for you, start looking a little north of LA, start looking a little east of LA if that's what you're looking for. Because if you go to a little bit smaller community, you're going to find more flexibility very often.
Okay. Now with the urgent centers, are you, when you're recruiting, are you recruiting for like the large chains? Because, there's the chains and then there's the smaller urgent cares. Who do you oftentimes find yourself recruiting more for? Is the large
I'm
ones?
personally recruiting for Providence, St. Joseph's Health, which has got urgent care and ambulatory care centers across 5 states presently. So I'm doing all of those facilities across all of those states. In the past, I've done emergency medicine, urgent care, and walk-in care kinds of positions for different employers. For very small facilities. So it's been pretty varied.
And because you mentioned cardiothoracic and orthopedic surgeons, like can they work at, is there a place for them specifically at urgent cares? Will they be doing their specific practice or they need to know like, hey, you're going to be doing primary care?
A cardiothoracic surgeon doesn't have a role for urgent care because they're not seeing that most, that highest acuity level. Cardiothoracic is responding to the emergency department for, absolute emergencies and interventions. You might look to hospitals, though, to see if they have intensivist programs, traumatologist programs where you're on call for emergency care in a hospital, not seeing a regular office-based practice and scheduling patients for surgeries, but dealing with just the emergency care. There are also laborist positions out there where you work for a facility and you do a shift, delivering baby after baby after baby in really, urban areas where there's a high intensity of deliveries at a facility. So there are all kinds of IST programs, not just hospitalists, that you can find. Surgicalists very often, are there to deal with, appendix and gallbladders.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. I like that because it's like when I'm on, and then when I'm off, it's somebody else's patient, and there's this like there's a contract, not like a written contract, but there's a contract that when you come on, you are taking on your partners or whoever you're taking over's patient. They're yours. You're going to treat them like they're yours. And then you go from there. And I think that is what allows the shift-based system to work. So I could come home and be with my kids and take them to school, knowing that someone that I did an appendectomy on the day before is going to be in really good hands. That's just how it works.
Oh, yeah. It's your generation that absolutely ruined the former model of healthcare. Because it used to be you were a primary care provider or you were an OBGYN, and you did your office practice, you did your hospitals round, you did your on-calls, you worked your 80 hours a week, and but your generation came along and said, nah, we're not doing that no more. I don't
know, Mary Kay, if you can blame my generation. I think it's more of the Millennials. I think it's the Millennials, and then we as because I'm the last of the Gen Xers. I'm 1978, so I'm the last Gen X, and I can definitely remember just still being in that I need to know my place. And I'm not gonna lie, if it wasn't for the millennials, I wouldn't be working like this. You're right.
Well, that generation has changed the game. You look like a millennial to me, so that's why I was blaming your generation. Yes, I am a Gen Xer, and so I've worked with right through all of those different generations in my career. But the whole creation of the IST movement, when it started with hospitalist and then it's gone to the other specialties, is really driven by these younger providers who are like, I am going to have a work-life balance. I'm going to know my children. I'm going to attend their events. I am not going to kill myself like, my parents' generation did. I can remember I had a family practitioner that I worked with for years, and I watched his kids grow up. And when his son was, 13, I think, he father was talking to him one day. He said, "So you're still planning on going to medical school and being a family practitioner like I am?" And he says, "Oh, hell no, Dad." He says, I'm gonna know my kids." And the father relayed that story to me, and he was just like, unbelievable. That this is where people are coming from, and so that IST movement coming into hospitals of people who are unwilling to spend every third night on call, doing the office practice, doing their 2 OR days or whatever it is. They're just not willing to put in that same overwhelming, life-consuming kind of effort to be a physician at this point in time, or a provider. And so that's where a lot of that is coming from.
For the folks who are listening, they can't see that I'm raising my hand. Sign me up, because I definitely do not think that it has to be the old way in which you describe it and stuff. And I think that, a lot of times people from the outside will be like, oh, well, it used to be better in the old days. It's like, well, you're not the person who's dealing with all of this stress for 24 hours and making those decisions at hour 24 that you have to make at hour 16 or have to make at hour 5, right? Like, it's a very different dichotomy where I think the public oftentimes looks at us almost like we're robots. And it's like, yeah, it can't work that way, and the system has to change. So in many regards, I'm really happy that it's changed, but I think we have a ways to go. But before we go all the way down that tangent, because you know me, I could get fired up on that. Yeah. I could go down that tangent, and me and you could go back down that tangent. Is great. So we covered the loan forgiveness. We covered how to determine if a market is competitive. Obviously, I think the other things to look at is how good the school district is, what the housing prices are in that neighborhood, and what are the other type of hospitals that are there also. I think all of that stuff kind of can help you determine, the level of competitive, how competitive a certain market can be and what you can get away with and so forth. But, oftentimes I agree with you. I think the most important thing is finding out what's your big and what are your deal breakers, and really learn that sometimes, if you want to be in an urban market or if you want to be in a competitive market, that there's going to have to be some give and take. There's going to be a situation where maybe, if you want to be in Orange County, like you said, you might have to take less salary, but also at the same time, you wake up in front of a beach every day. Hey, that's how it works. Yeah. I agree with you there. Anything else that would help in this situation? Any other questions? Anything else that you could say, that's one thing I want to say to the people who are listening?
When to start your job search is also probably a bit of a variable that surprises people. And again, those more desirable locations, if you are sending out a resume a year in advance of when you're ready to start practice, you're probably not going to get a lot of callbacks in, Orange County, because they have people who can start in 3 or 4 months that are applying. And so, that's not to say don't keep applying, but don't be surprised and don't feel rejected when you don't hear necessarily a lot of response. If you're a urologist looking for a position in LA, you probably aren't going to get a lot of callbacks and a lot of interest until you're about 6 months before your start date. And, if you're a urologist who's willing to talk to, a place in Maine, a place in Wisconsin, or Montana, they'd probably hire you, sign a contract 2 years before your graduation even.
You could be a king or a queen.
You're going to get different reactions from different parts of the country to that application process. As well. And again, places like New York and LA, start your license process early. Have your license in hand when you're starting your search if you possibly can, or note on your CV that, license process started on, in this month and time frame, so that they know you're almost have accomplished it, because, some states that is a lengthy, arduous, time-consuming process, and, an employer will want to know that you have accomplished that benchmark already and are ready to go or close to ready to go when they're going to be talking to you.
Boom. There it is. Mary Kay with Provider Solutions and Development, Senior Recruiter. Listen, guys, it's not all about just, realizing that salary and all these different things. When you're in a competitive market, you just it's a give and take. So if someone wants to continue the conversation with you and talk about some of the things that we talked about here, how do they get in contact with you?
They can reach me at marykay.moreau at psdrecruit.org. They can look up PS&D and see all of the jobs with our facility. I do want to put in one other plug for my company because we do something that is really unique and different. We're a larger recruitment company under a health system, and we have created a whole division that is our residency outreach program, and we have dedicated employed staff who are helping first, second, third year residents or fellows think about their job search, educating them about contracting language and details in the search. They've got tools and resources and even different lectures that we're doing at all times to help people, particularly during that phase, because, medical school and residency is great at teaching you to be a doctor, but it's not necessarily very good at teaching you how to find a job and what mistakes you could make in finding that job and the contracting and all of that. So we've got a whole series of resources that are available to residency programs across the country, not just Providence resources. It's a service we're providing to our own residents, and we decided to extend it out to individuals and residency programs across the country because it's such valuable content. And so if anybody is interested in learning more about those resources, particularly for newer physicians, happy to put you in touch with our residency outreach team as well.
Hey guys, all of those things that she mentioned, those links are in the show notes. Mary Kay, thank you again for coming on Docs Outside the Box. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks, Dr. Nate.